Have you ever been told that you're too sensitive, too emotional, too affected by things that others seem to brush off so easily, too aware of every shift in tone, every unspoken tension in a room, every subtle change in someone's face? Maybe you've wondered your whole life, why does everything feel so intense for me? Why does a small rejection linger for days, while others seem to move on within minutes? And over time, a quiet belief begins to form inside you, a painful one, that maybe there's something wrong with you. But what if the truth is something very different? What if the reason sensitive people hurt more has nothing to do with weakness, and everything to do with how they learned to survive in a world that never understood them? Because sensitivity itself is not the wound. The wound is what happens when sensitivity meets misunderstanding, neglect, or emotional silence. And that hidden story, the one most people never see, is what we're going to talk about today. Sensitive people experience the world differently. Their nervous systems are finely tuned instruments. They notice the things others miss, the quiet sadness in someone's voice, the tension behind a smile, the heaviness in a room that no one else seems to feel. But this heightened awareness does not only apply to beauty or connection. It also means they experience pain more deeply. And here is the part that is rarely talked about. When a sensitive child grows up in an environment where their emotions are not understood, something very subtle begins to happen. They start learning that their natural responses are somehow wrong. Imagine a child who cries easily when something hurts their feelings. Instead of curiosity or comfort, they hear, "Why are you crying again? You're too sensitive? You're overreacting?" These words may seem small, but for a sensitive nervous system they carry enormous weight, because what the child begins to absorb is not just the message about that moment. The message becomes, my feelings are too much, my reactions are wrong, something about me needs to be fixed. And once this belief takes root, it begins shaping the way that person moves through life. Sensitive people often grow up becoming experts at reading other people's emotional states. They learn to watch carefully, to adjust themselves, to make sure no one else is uncomfortable, because somewhere inside, they have learned that the safest way to exist is to minimize the impact of their own emotions. So they become the listeners, the ones who understand everyone else's pain, the ones who offer compassion even when they themselves are hurting. But here's the quiet tragedy. While sensitive people become incredibly skilled at caring for others, they rarely receive the same depth of understanding in return. Not because others don't care, but because most people simply don't experience emotions at the same intensity. So the sensitive person often ends up feeling alone in their emotional world. They feel deeply, they love deeply, they give deeply, and yet they often walk through life with a quiet ache that no one quite understands. Another layer of pain comes from the way sensitive people relate to conflict. Because they feel emotions so intensely, conflict can feel almost unbearable. A harsh word, a raised voice, or emotional distance from someone they love can trigger an overwhelming internal storm. So many sensitive individuals develop a powerful strategy for survival. They become people pleasers, they smooth things over, they apologize even when they have done nothing wrong. They sacrifice their own needs just to keep the emotional environment peaceful. From the outside, this may look like kindness, and often it is. But underneath that kindness is often a deep fear, the fear that if they express their true feelings, they will be rejected or misunderstood. Over time, this constant self-silencing creates another form of suffering. Sensitive people begin to lose connection with their own authentic voice. They become so focused on maintaining harmony that they forget their own needs deserve space too. And then there is another painful aspect of sensitivity that many people struggle with: memory. Sensitive people don't just experience emotions deeply in the moment, they remember them deeply. A painful experience that someone else forgets in a week may stay alive in the sensitive person's mind for years. Not because they want to hold on to pain, but because their minds are constantly trying to understand what happened. Why did that person say that? Why did the relationship end? What did I do wrong? This deep reflection can become both a gift and a burden. It allows sensitive people to grow, to learn, and to develop profound empathy for others. But it can also trap them in cycles of overthinking and self-blame. And yet, despite all of this pain, sensitivity carries something incredibly powerful, because the same nervous system that feels pain so deeply is also capable of experiencing love, compassion, and connection at extraordinary levels. Sensitive people often become the healers, the artists, the listeners, the ones who sit quietly with another person's pain without trying to fix or dismiss it. They bring depth into a world that often values speed and distraction. But for that gift to flourish, something important must happen. Sensitive people must stop believing the old story that their sensitivity is the problem, because the truth is this: the pain did not come from being sensitive. The pain came from living in environments that did not know how to protect or nurture sensitivity. And once that realization begins to sink in, something profound can happen. Sensitive people can begin to see themselves differently, not as broken, not as weak, but as individuals whose emotional depth was never the flaw. It was simply a trait that needed understanding, boundaries, and compassion. Let me tell you some 5 emotional truths that why sensitive people hurt more than others. First, they were taught that their feelings were too much. There is a moment that happens quietly in the life of a sensitive child, a moment so small that the adults around them may not even notice it. But inside that child, something important begins to change. It might begin with tears. A sensitive child feels things intensely. A harsh tone, a disappointed look, a small rejection on the playground. These experiences do not simply pass through them. They land deeply in the body. The child's nervous system reacts honestly, naturally expressing what it feels through tears, questions, or withdrawal. And then the world responds. Why are you crying again? You're too sensitive? Stop overreacting. It's not a big deal. To the adult, these words may seem harmless, even practical. They may believe they are helping the child become stronger, more resilient. But to a sensitive child, those moments carry a very different message. The child is not just hearing a correction about behavior. The child is learning something about themselves. They begin to feel that their natural emotional responses are somehow inappropriate, that the way they experience the world is wrong, that the feelings rising inside them are not welcome. And here is where the hidden wound begins to form, because a child cannot simply stop feeling. The nervous system that makes them sensitive is not something they can switch off. So when their feelings are rejected or dismissed, they face an impossible dilemma. They must either continue expressing their emotions and risk disapproval, or they must begin learning how to hide them. Most sensitive children choose the second path. They become quiet observers of the emotional environment around them. They begin studying the reactions of the adults they depend on. They notice when their sadness makes someone uncomfortable, when their fear is brushed aside, when their excitement is met with indifference. Slowly, they start adjusting themselves. They hold their tears a little longer. They stop sharing certain thoughts. They swallow emotions that once flowed naturally. And this process happens so gradually that no one recognizes it as a loss. The sensitive child is praised for becoming more mature, less dramatic, easier to deal with. But inside, something very important has been pushed underground. The child has not stopped feeling deeply. They have only stopped feeling safely. And those emotions that were never welcome do not disappear. They simply move inward, where they continue to live in the body, shaping how that person experiences relationships, conflict, and self-worth later in life. As the sensitive child grows older, a quiet belief begins to take root. They start to feel that there is something inherently wrong with their emotional nature. They compare themselves to others who seem less affected, less wounded by the same experiences. Why do others move on so easily? Why does rejection linger so long inside me? Why do small things feel so big? Without realizing it, they carry the old message from childhood into adulthood. My feelings are too much. And because they believe this, they begin to apologize for their emotions. They hesitate before expressing vulnerability. They second guess whether their reactions are valid. Sometimes they even turn their sensitivity against themselves, judging their own hearts with the same harshness they once heard from the outside world. But here is the truth that often takes years to uncover. The pain was never caused by sensitivity itself. The pain came from the experience of having a sensitive heart in an environment that did not know how to hold it. A child does not need their emotions to be corrected or minimized. What they need is to be met with curiosity and understanding. They need someone to say, in words or presence, I see how deeply you feel, and that's okay. When that kind of emotional safety is missing, the sensitive child grows into an adult who may spend years trying to reconnect with their own feelings, learning slowly that the very part of themselves they once tried to hide is not a flaw. It is simply a heart that learned early on that its depth was unwelcome. And the journey of healing begins the moment they realize that their feelings were never too much. They were simply waiting for a world that could finally understand them. Secondly, they absorb the emotions of everyone around them. There is something about a sensitive person that is rarely visible from the outside. To most people, emotions appear as something that belongs to an individual. Your feelings are yours. Mine are mine. We imagine clear boundaries between them. But for someone with a deeply sensitive nervous system, those boundaries are often much more porous. From a very early age, sensitive people begin noticing things that others overlook. A subtle change in someone's tone. The tension that suddenly fills a room when two people are upset with each other. The sadness behind someone's smile that no one else seems to question. They do not consciously decide to observe these things. Their nervous system simply picks them up automatically, like an antenna tuned to emotional frequencies that others cannot hear. For a sensitive child, the emotional atmosphere of their environment becomes just as important as the physical one. The child may walk into a room and immediately feel that something is wrong, even if no one has said a word. A parent's quiet frustration, a hidden disappointment, or the lingering stress of the day can settle into the child's body without explanation. And because children naturally assume that they are somehow connected to everything happening around them, they often believe that these emotional shifts have something to do with them. If a parent seems distant, the child may wonder what they did wrong. If someone in the family is anxious or overwhelmed, the child may feel an unspoken responsibility to help ease that discomfort without realizing it. Sensitive children begin carrying emotional burdens that were never theirs to begin with. They become very attentive to the needs of others. They watch carefully for signs of distress. They learn how to adjust their own behavior in order to calm situations, soften tensions, or prevent conflict before it begins. In many families, this sensitivity is quietly rewarded. The child who understands everyone's feelings becomes the good one, the thoughtful one, the peacemaker. Adults may appreciate how considerate and empathetic the child appears, but what often goes unnoticed is the cost. Because when someone spends years absorbing the emotional states of others, they begin losing the ability to clearly distinguish where their own feelings end and someone else's begin. A sensitive person may leave a conversation feeling exhausted without knowing why. They may spend time with someone who is anxious or unhappy and later feel a heavy emotional weight inside themselves. Even though nothing in their own life has changed, it is as if the emotions of others pass through them and remain there. This can make relationships both beautiful and painful. Sensitive people often have an extraordinary ability to connect with others. They can sense pain before it is spoken. They can sit with someone in silence and understand what that person is going through without needing words. This depth of empathy allows them to offer comfort in ways that feel incredibly genuine. But the same openness that allows them to connect so deeply also leaves them vulnerable to emotional overload. If someone they love is hurting, they often feel that pain almost as if it were their own. If a relationship becomes tense or unstable, the sensitive person may carry the emotional pressure of that tension constantly in their body. Over time, this constant absorption can create a quiet form of exhaustion. Sensitive people may feel overwhelmed in crowded environments, emotionally drained after certain conversations, or anxious without fully understanding where the feeling originated. Sometimes they blame themselves for this intensity. They wonder why they cannot simply detach the way others seem able to. They may wish they could build thicker emotional walls, but the truth is that their nervous system was never designed for thick walls. It was designed for connection. The challenge is that many sensitive people were never taught how to protect their emotional space. They learned how to care for others, how to notice others, how to respond to others, but rarely how to remain connected to themselves while doing so. So they grow into adults who carry the invisible weight of many people's emotions. They become the friend everyone turns to during difficult times, the partner who understands unspoken struggles, the listener who holds space for pain that others cannot bear to face. And while this role can feel meaningful, it can also create a deep sense of loneliness, because the person who absorbs everyone else's emotions often has very few places where they feel safe enough to lay down their own. Their empathy becomes a quiet strength, but also a silent burden. And the healing begins when sensitive people slowly learn something they were rarely shown growing up, that empathy does not require absorbing everything around them. It is possible to feel compassion without carrying the entire emotional weight of the world. It is possible to remain open-hearted while still protecting the delicate space inside themselves where their own feelings live. For a sensitive person, learning this is not about becoming less caring. It is about finally realizing that their heart was never meant to hold everyone's pain alone. Another important reason is that they learn to put others first to feel safe. There is a quiet lesson many sensitive people learn very early in life. Though no one ever sits them down and teaches it directly, it is not written in words. It is learned through small moments, repeated again and again, until it becomes a way of being. The lesson is simple, but powerful. If I keep others happy, I will be safe. For a sensitive child, the emotional environment around them is not just background noise. It is something their whole body responds to. Raised voices, tension between parents, disappointment in someone's tone, these things do not pass by unnoticed. They land in the child's nervous system like sudden storms. And when you are a child who feels everything deeply, those storms can feel overwhelming. So the child begins to watch carefully. They notice what makes the adults around them calm and what makes them irritated. They learn which behaviors bring warmth and approval and which ones bring distance or frustration. Very quietly, they start adjusting themselves. Maybe they stop expressing anger because it seems to make others uncomfortable. Maybe they hide their sadness because no one seems to know what to do with it. Maybe they become the easy child, the one who doesn't cause problems. To the outside world, this child appears thoughtful, cooperative, even unusually mature. But beneath that maturity is often a nervous system that has learned to stay constantly alert to the emotional needs of others. The child becomes skilled at sensing when someone is upset and quickly tries to restore peace. They might comfort a parent who is stressed, smooth over conflicts between siblings, or take on responsibilities beyond their years. And often adults praise this behavior. They say the child is kind, selfless, considerate, and indeed those qualities may genuinely exist. Sensitive people are often naturally empathetic and caring. But when a child learns that their sense of safety depends on keeping everyone else comfortable, something important begins to shift inside them. Their attention moves outward. Instead of asking, "What do I feel? What do I need?" they begin asking, "What does everyone else need from me right now?" This habit becomes so deeply ingrained that it follows them into adulthood without question. As adults, sensitive people who learn this pattern often become the ones who give endlessly in relationships. They listen patiently, offer support, and try to anticipate the needs of the people they love. They may go out of their way to avoid disappointing anyone. If someone is upset, they feel responsible for fixing it. If there is tension in a relationship, they often assume they must have done something wrong. Conflict becomes deeply uncomfortable, not just because of the disagreement itself, but because it threatens the emotional stability they work so hard to maintain. So they apologize quickly, even when they are not at fault. They swallow their own frustrations. They compromise again and again in order to restore harmony. From the outside, this can look like kindness and generosity. But inside, something more complicated is happening. Because when a person constantly places others first in order to feel safe, their own emotional needs begin to fade into the background. They may struggle to recognize when they are hurt or exhausted. They may feel guilty for wanting space, for setting boundaries, or for asking others to consider their feelings. Sometimes they don't even realize how much they have been suppressing until they reach a point of deep fatigue. There can be a moment when the sensitive person suddenly feels overwhelmed by the realization that they have spent years caring for everyone else's emotional world while quietly neglecting their own. And yet, This pattern was never a flaw in their character, it was a survival strategy. A sensitive child did not choose to become hyper-attentive to others' needs out of weakness. They did it because their environment made it feel necessary. In a world where emotional harmony felt fragile, the child stepped into the role of protector, mediator, caretaker. They learned that if they kept everyone calm and satisfied, life would be a little more predictable. The tragedy is that while this strategy may have helped them survive childhood, it often leaves them disconnected from their own inner voice later in life. They may know exactly how others feel, yet struggle to name their own emotions. They may give love generously, yet feel uncertain about whether they deserve the same care in return. Healing begins when the sensitive person slowly recognizes that their safety no longer depends on managing everyone else's emotions. They begin to understand that relationships do not require constant self-sacrifice in order to survive. And perhaps most importantly, they begin learning that their needs, their boundaries, and their feelings are not burdens that must be hidden. They are simply part of being human. For someone who spent years believing that peace comes only from putting others first, discovering this truth can feel both unfamiliar and liberating, because it means they no longer have to disappear in order to belong. And when they remember pain more deeply, there is something about the mind of a sensitive person that refuses to simply let experiences pass by. For many people, painful moments eventually fade into the background. A hurtful comment, a rejection, a misunderstanding. With time, these events lose their emotional intensity and become distant memories. But for someone with a deeply sensitive inner world, experiences rarely disappear so easily. They remain alive in the mind. A sensitive person may replay a conversation long after it has ended. They revisit the exact words that were spoken, the tone in someone's voice, the expression on their face at that moment. Their mind begins searching carefully through the memory, almost like someone examining a fragile object from every angle, not because they enjoy holding on to pain, but because they are trying to understand it. Sensitive minds are naturally wired for reflection. They want meaning. They want coherence. When something hurts, the mind does not simply move on. It begins asking questions. Why did that happen? Did I misunderstand something? Was there something I could have done differently? What did that moment really mean? And so the memory returns again and again, not as a form of punishment, but as an attempt to make sense of an emotional experience that felt deeply significant. For a sensitive person, pain is rarely just an event. It becomes a story the mind tries to understand. A single rejection might not just feel like disappointment. It can awaken older emotional echoes that the person may not even realize are present, memories of other moments where they felt unseen, misunderstood, or unimportant. This is why sensitive people often describe certain experiences as staying with them for years. It is not that they are unwilling to let go. It is that their inner world processes experiences with a depth that makes those moments linger. The mind returns to them, almost as if it is saying, there is something here that still needs to be understood, and sometimes the mind turns that search inward. Sensitive people may begin examining themselves with the same intensity they use to analyze situations. They may wonder whether they somehow caused the pain, whether they misread the situation, whether they were too emotional, too vulnerable, too open. In this way, reflection can slowly transform into self-doubt. What began as a natural desire to understand and experience can become a quiet pattern of overthinking, where the mind circles the same memory repeatedly, hoping to arrive at a conclusion that will finally bring peace. But often, the answers the mind is searching for cannot be found in the details of the moment itself, because pain does not always come from a single event. Sometimes what hurts so deeply in the present moment is that it touches something older within us, something that has not yet been fully acknowledged or understood. Sensitive people are particularly vulnerable to this because their minds and bodies store emotional experiences with such vividness. A look of disapproval today may carry the emotional weight of many earlier moments where acceptance felt uncertain. A sudden distance in a relationship may awaken a familiar fear of losing connection. The mind keeps returning to these experiences because it is trying to resolve something deeper than the event itself. It is trying to restore a sense of safety and understanding. But here is the quiet truth that many sensitive people eventually discover. Healing does not always come from analyzing every detail of the past. Sometimes healing begins when a person learns to meet those memories with compassion rather than interrogation. Instead of asking endlessly, "Why did this happen? What did I do wrong?" they begin asking a different question. What was I feeling in that moment? Because beneath all the thinking and revisiting of memories, there is often a very simple emotional truth waiting to be acknowledged. The sensitive person was hurt. They were longing to be understood, valued, or loved in that moment. And when that need was not met, the experience left an imprint. Once that truth is allowed to exist without judgment, the mind can begin to loosen its grip on the past. The memory no longer needs to be solved like a puzzle. It simply becomes part of the story of a heart that felt deeply. And for sensitive people, that depth, the very thing that makes pain linger, is also what allows them to develop profound empathy, insight, and emotional wisdom over time. The same mind that remembers pain so vividly is also capable of understanding the human experience in ways that many others never fully see. They love and care more deeply than most people. There is something quietly extraordinary about the way sensitive people love. It is not always loud or dramatic. Often, it appears in the smallest gestures, the way they notice when someone is unusually quiet, the way they remember details others forget, the way they sense when someone is struggling even before a single word is spoken. For a sensitive person, caring about someone is not just an idea. It is an experience that lives deeply in the body. When they love someone, they do not simply offer attention or affection from a distance. They become emotionally present in a way that many people rarely experience. They listen not just to the words being spoken, but to what lies beneath them. They feel the emotional weight of another person's struggles, as if those struggles matter to them personally. This depth of care is one of the most beautiful qualities sensitive people carry, but it is also one of the reasons they hurt so deeply. Because when you care about someone with that level of openness, the boundaries between your heart and theirs become very thin. Their joy becomes your joy. Their sadness becomes your sadness. Their rejection can feel like a personal wound. A sensitive person does not approach relationships lightly. When they trust someone, they open themselves in ways that are profoundly vulnerable. They reveal parts of their inner world that they may hide from the rest of the world. They give attention, patience, and emotional presence that often comes naturally to them. But here is where the quiet pain sometimes begins. Not everyone loves with the same emotional depth. Many people care deeply in their own way, but their emotional experience of relationships may not carry the same intensity. They may move through conflicts more quickly. They may not notice the subtle emotional signals that a sensitive person picks up so easily. For the sensitive person, this difference can feel confusing and painful. They may give their heart fully, only to feel that the other person is only partially present. They may offer understanding again and again, while quietly longing for someone who will understand them with the same depth. Sometimes they find themselves in relationships where they become the emotional caretaker. They listen, support, and hold space for others' pain, hoping that eventually someone will do the same for them. But when that reciprocity doesn't appear, the sensitive person can begin to feel unseen. They may wonder why their efforts to love so deeply do not always bring the same care in return. They may question whether they are asking for too much, whether their expectations are unrealistic. Yet the truth is far simpler and far more human. Sensitive people are not asking for too much. They are simply offering a level of emotional presence that many people have never learned how to give. Their capacity to love is shaped by their ability to feel deeply. They notice emotional nuances. They remember meaningful moments. They hold on to the connections that matter to them with remarkable loyalty. But this openness also means that loss, distance, and disappointment affect them more intensely. When a relationship ends or a connection fades, a sensitive person does not easily close the door on those feelings. Their heart continues to revisit the memories, the conversations, the shared moments that once felt meaningful. This is not because they are weak. It is because they allowed themselves to care without holding back. And while that openness can lead to heartbreak, it is also what allows sensitive people to experience love in its most authentic form. They do not love halfway. They do not give pieces of themselves cautiously measured out over time. When they love, they bring their full emotional presence. And though that depth sometimes leads them into pain, it also gives them a rare capacity to create relationships filled with genuine empathy, warmth, and emotional honesty. The challenge for sensitive people is not learning how to love less. It is learning how to love without abandoning themselves in the process. When they begin to recognize that their depth of care is not a weakness but a strength, something important shifts inside them. They start to understand that the right relationships will not require them to shrink their emotional world. The right relationships will meet them in that depth. And when that happens, the very quality that once made them feel painfully different becomes the same quality that allows them to experience connection in its most meaningful and transformative form. And so, if you are someone who has spent your life being called too sensitive, it may be time to reconsider what that label really meant. Perhaps it never meant that there was something wrong with you. Perhaps it meant that you were feeling things that others had learned to ignore. Sensitive people often walk through life carrying a quiet story inside them, a story that says their emotions are too intense, their reactions too deep, their hearts too open for this world. Over time, they begin to believe that the safest way to exist is to shrink that part of themselves. But shrinking your heart has never been the path to healing. The truth is that sensitivity is not a flaw in human nature. It is a form of awareness, a way of experiencing life with a depth that many people never fully touch. Sensitive people notice the emotional undercurrents in a room. They sense pain before it is spoken. They care about people in ways that go far beyond surface interactions. Yes, this depth can make life painful at times. It can make rejection sting longer, conflict feel heavier, and memories linger more deeply. But the same sensitivity that makes pain more visible also makes love, empathy, creativity, and understanding far more powerful. The world often teaches sensitive people to toughen up, to stop feeling so much, to build walls around their hearts. But what sensitive people truly need is not less feeling. They need environments where their feelings are respected, relationships where their depth is not dismissed, spaces where their emotional awareness is seen as a strength rather than a burden. And perhaps most importantly, they need to learn something that many were never taught growing up, that their emotions do not make them weak, that their empathy is not something to apologize for, that their hearts were never the problem. The real challenge for sensitive people is not learning how to feel less. It is learning how to protect their emotional space while still allowing their natural compassion to exist. When that balance begins to form, sensitivity stops feeling like a wound. It becomes a quiet kind of wisdom. Because the people who feel deeply are often the same people who understand others deeply. They are the ones who bring gentleness into difficult conversations, the ones who recognize pain behind silence, the ones who remind others that being human means being able to feel. And in a world that often moves too quickly to notice the emotional lives of others, that kind of presence is not weakness. It is a rare and powerful form of strength.